November 28th of 2022 gave us the release of 30th Anniversary, and we know what happened to the market space of Magic the Gathering ever since. But now that we know that the reserve list cards have not gone to zero, where does that leave the market space for this collectible area of Magic the Gathering? How will players react when prices start to rise? And what cards are players going to focus on? In today's video, we're going to be talking about all of these things because it's about time we got back to a little bit of reserve list MTG finance. I hope you guys are strapped in and ready for a reserve list conversation because chances are you're not going to like everything I'm going to tell you in today's video. Welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here, and thanks again for hanging out with me on the channel today and finding me in the nacho cheese universe that is YouTube. That's the old saying I used to use. I haven't used it in a while. It still feels pretty darn good. If you enjoy my content, if you like to hang out with the Moxman, all you guys got to do is hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, because new content comes out every single day. We're talking reserve list today, and there's a lot of information going around about reserve list cards slowly rising in value. You guys know I cover this every Sunday with the reserve list top 10 edition of the hottest selling cards, but there's a lot of information coming out I think players need to know about if they're going to start buying into this market, buying into these cards, or picking up cards they've always wanted, which a lot of you who are my regulars on this channel never stopped buying. Okay, so let's dive into this one. For those who didn't know, the reserve list has been around for an extremely long time. It's had different iterations and different, ways of presenting itself, but the most current version has 572 cards on the reserve list. Now, most of us will agree that a lot of these cards are pure junk. They're not worth anything. There are cards people enjoy. There are stylish cards people like to play with, but those aren't the ones. Those are not the blue chip cards. Those are not the cards that pay dividends over the years and show true value as the years go by. Some of these cards went through their first buyouts in 2021, 2022, before everything crashed down after the economy turned, after 30th Anniversary got announced and obliterated people's belief and faith in this market. And that means LGSs dumped product, cleared things out, got as much cash as they could, and they took huge losses. LGSs actually closed over some of the stuff with the 30th Anniversary, and we saw a shedding of the market price value as it continued to decline over the last, 18 months, give or take? Now, what has changed? Nothing. Nothing has indicated the reserve list should go up right now. Nothing. I have no announcement from Wizards of the Coast. I have no weird data information saying Wizards decided to do this. But what I do know is that card prices are starting to rise in a lot of the blue chip cards. And when I mean blue chip, I mean the cards players most often seek out because they are played in multiple formats and they are enjoyed by players. We're talking dual lands. That is a card that everyone likes to get. It's not always my favorite card of cards you should buy because the price of entry is still pretty expensive, and I think there's very niche cards you should buy ahead of them, but they are a card players seek out when they're first starting to collect Vintage and Legacy. And the arguments I'm getting from players right now about why they're buying them, why they've chosen to start picking up all these dual lands: 1, the price was so low. 2, Wizards of the Coast with their reprint strategy has not lent any value to the secondary market. And if you're going to make us as players spend this much cash, we'd rather go for cards that have a long track history of having value. So every single time a player buys some kind of reserve list card is another nail, big or small, into the coffin that is the reserve list, which means Wizards is not going to reprint this. It's not coming around because as new generations of players start to buy these cards, it gets further and further away from the grasp of reality of reprinting without having some kind of lawsuit or massive thing. That's what people believe, including myself. The further we get away, the years that go by, and every time Wizards has tried, like 30th Anniversary, they get slapped around. In this case, it was because of the price point. As a specialty product and as a proxy, it just didn't fly with players, okay? Because you couldn't use it in tournaments. Although Old School does allow for collector edition and international editions, just to keep that in mind. So where does that leave us? Well, players have started to buy those dual lands. because you had things like Savannah, Scrubland, Badlands, even things like Underground Sea losing that much value, and being able to buy them in the $400 range for moderate to heavily played meant a lot of players could now access them because they didn't want to spend $350 on a collector box of value that will be lost. It's a weird kind of dynamic we're facing right now in MTG Finance. Players don't always like to admit it to themselves, but they don't want their cards to go to zero. They spent too much money. So they look for cards that are going to have value. If they think they're going to keep losing, they're going to seek out the cards that have value. And that includes other cards like Wheel of Fortune. One of the cards I do think a lot of players should buy, because those kind of cards, when you look at them nowadays, cards that cause you to have dedicated deck construction, it costs 3 blue plus X. Those things you have to have blue. But Wheel of Fortune is 1 red plus a couple of generic, which means it can be splashed in a multitude of commander decks. It gets played in Vintage Legacy. Like, it has playability. Not to mention kitchen table Magic, guys. Never forget that. People just playing at the random tables because they're old school guys who just have lots of cards like myself, we tend to play that a lot. Those cards are being bought up en masse. There's too many top 10 videos now where I see increased sales volumes that just don't add up to what we're seeing at local LGS levels, because those LGSs have sold out and don't have the cards available. And what little stock they do have, they've recognized and have started to price correct and bring their prices up a bit. But either way, they still are cash strapped, so they're still selling stuff on discount. And I don't think the LGSs are actually aware or don't have the money to be aware and dive into this market when it's this low. Now, when you look at the cards, the blue chip cards that players want, I'm not talking about the little cool combo cards that draw players in. The Soldevi Digger mixed with River Song was a nice little thing, had massive buyouts. The card went up to like $15. Not huge, but it was like $1 before that. So that means it 15x'd its money. And there are players who owned a lot of copies that sold into that market and made a fortune. I'll be honest, it happened. And I was not one of those lucky people, but I do understand why it happened. And I saw people's sales figures to say, hey, you can really make a lot of money doing this. Yes, there's always a chance. But those are not blue chip cards you have to own. Those are combo cards. They're unique. They're fun. Wait for the market to drop. Buy those cards. They're not going to be super expensive in the long term. It's going to take a lot more buyouts and a lot longer lifespan of Magic to really eat away at the lower end reserve list cards. It's going to take multiple buyouts, people consolidating over the years and holding the cards longer and longer and using them. The more you use these cards and the more they get played, the more popular they can become. We all know how it can go in a lot of the formats like Commander if a real cool combo comes along. So those aren't the cards. But when you look at cards like Fork, that's still 2 red, but it gets used a lot. You look at Braingeyser, 2 blue plus X. Those cards are still kind of dedicated mana supply, but they do get played. They do get bought a lot. When you look at some cards, though, when you look at the Power 9, those cards are like the next level echelon after you get past your dual lands. After you get by a lot of the mid-range cards that you might want to buy. I'm talking the cards like Drop of Honey that are like $500, $600, $700, but do get played. But you can also use Prophesary Nodes, which is a cheaper version of that card. The market we see right now has players buying these cards. Candelabras of Tawnos. We're still picking up Argivian Archaeologists, but they're buying the cheapest copies because these are not players who are actually speculating for the sense they intend to make a lot of money. It is a passive byproduct of them being able to afford the card. Yes, they can buy it. They want the card, and they're hoping somewhere down the line that maybe it's worth a lot of money and can help justify some of the money they spent. Okay, it's not these direct consumer guys who are speculating tens of thousands of dollars. There are some people still doing that. There are people buying up and consolidating a lot of the power of these cards. I myself, I couldn't help it, guys. When we did the 20K party, if you recall, we did a whole bunch of sets of the Dark that I gave away for really low prices, and that's because the cards were so inexpensive that when I was buying them in bulk, when I'm buying 400 or 500 copies of something at a time for 5 or 6 cents less sometimes, and buying commons up means you only have to hit a few big cards to finish complete sets. So if I bought 20,000 Dark cards out of a print run of 65 million possible, and what's available to the market, what's still gone, and nothing really spiked, that tells you nobody wants it. But if somebody can consolidate and control that large of a position of the reserve list cards that are in the Dark, that could spell a lot of trouble for somebody who's trying to finish a dark set or go after a card later. Let's just use something like an Exorcist, and somebody has 1,000 copies out of the possible arrangement that's available. All their prices are jacked up because prices start rising again, and this person comes in and undercuts the market. Those things happen all the time as well, but it's not a blue chip. Remember that. It's not a card you have to own. Blue chip cards on the reserve list are going to be cards you buy and never sell back to the market, and that generally applies to mainly mana-based cards. A Volros Stronghold, Lake of the Dead, Winding Canyons. Yes, even Soldevi Excavations, I think, is a phenomenal card. Balduvian Trading Post, being able to tap for 2 mana, being able to tap and do some damage to somebody who's attacking an opponent, these are great cards to have, and they're very inexpensive right now. Even cards like Kel'Joran Outpost, you can't underrate these cards. What was it, Lotus Veil? Great cards are out there, guys. Great land cards that are available that Wizards has tried to create variant alterations, but of course, they're never as powerful as the original. And a lot of times, they can work in conjunction with the original. I'm thinking of things like when you take a look at Gaia's Cradle, and you look at Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, you look at all these cards that can fit into these decks. Or was that one, the Ichelon one from the one they can flip over as a special land? You know what I'm talking about. You guys know what I'm talking about, even though I can't remember the name. That again becomes a Gaia's Cradle when you flip it over. These things are phenomenal. Another kind of blue chip card you want to look at is Mox Diamond. It fits everywhere, but its price has been going up. I talked about it on the last top 10. And again, it's probably going to make my list this week. There's too many sales happening. There's too much action going on, and because it's not happening at the LGS level, since it's not all happening where players can see it, they're not really aware of how much is going on behind the scenes right now because the market isn't ready to accept that the prices are going up. They don't want to think about it, that these cards are actually rebounding and coming back around. We've heard for a long time the cards were on the decline, and players, well, they want it to keep happening so they can get to a price point where they can buy it. The last thing you want to hear is Savannah was down to $170 for a heavily played copy. And now it's back up to $230, $240 for a heavily played copy because supply and demand didn't meet up and it didn't go lower. More supply didn't come into the market. The demand is kind of stayed very steady, and that's risen the prices up. That's not what people want to hear, but that's what happens with the blue chip cards. The cards that everyone wants to own because they're going to be played basically for the lifetime of you as a Magic player. So, in my opinion, should you be buying these cards? Are these cards that are available? Well, I would always factor in your budget and all these crazy things, but if money's not the problem, and you look and you want a card, the prices are still very affordable for the majority of players who want these cards. They are affordable for the players who can go after them. I know there's lots of players who are going to say, just proxy it, just go get a fake, but guess what? A lot of people don't want fakes, don't want proxies. It's up to each person to determine it, and I understand both sides of that argument. But for a player who's going to be spending the money anyway to buy a collector box, who now chooses not to buy the collector box because it's cheaper to buy their first Wheel of Fortune and have money left over, this is a causal effect of what Wizards of the Coast has done with their pricing. So the blue chip cards, those mana-based cards, and a few others out there on the reserve list are the cards that people are seeking out. There's a reason why Metal Worker is getting bought. There's a reason why Candelabra of Tawnos, even though it's expensive, is still getting bought by people. Those Drops of Honey, as well as even a few obscure cards that aren't really expensive, and stuff like Mind Over Matter, it's less than $100. Academy Rector, these kind of small mid-range cards are also been disappearing and being bought up from TCG Player, as well as eBay, Facebook groups. The sales are happening. They're still going on in the backdrop. And I just want to inform people about what is actually going on. Because when the prices start to go even higher, that's when you're all going to notice it. When some big YouTube guy comes out and says, hey, did you guys see what's going on? Did you see this buyout like we saw with Copy Artifact? Another kind of blue chip card. Remember, one blue, one generic. It fits in so many decks, it's being bought a lot. Its versatility allows for it to be used in a lot of decks. Remember that. The old school stuff, one blue and a couple other mana is all it took to do some really crazy things. And because of that, that's why these cards get bought first. And the alternate crazy versions that are going to get reprinted and get pounded in value over the years, will still get bought when players think they're cheap enough to buy. But when you see a reserve list card, like we saw with Copy Artifact, only coming in at $12, no wonder a buyout happened. It was too low. Fast Bond at 1 green, even though it's banned, look how many copies sold. I thought it was kind of funny when people thought I owned hundreds of copies, and it's like, no, I have 8. Plus what's in my decks. But 8 that I kept near mint from Revised that I bought a few years before the buyouts happened. I don't need to have a large position in those cards because it's not one of the ones that I personally need more of. But there are people out there consolidating. There are people buying these cards up. If there's cards you're after, take a look. If there's cards you want to buy and you think they're going to go up, it might be time to buy. I don't want people to say that this is ridiculous, because it's going to happen. It's going to come back. The cards didn't go to zero like everyone thought. It's too far along now, and people are starting to bounce back. I'm not saying they have any more respect for Wizards of the Coast, nor do they care what that company does, because some of these people are just reserve list buyers. That's all they want. They love a card, they're going to buy it. They love old cards. They like the idea of them, the power level they provide, as well as the playability and the talking point and flex that come along with owning those cards. When people see what happens 6 months after it's too late, that's when you have people really upset. But if you took time to actually look at the market and look at who's buying these cards and why they're buying them, it does make a lot of sense. To those people buying them, they've always wanted them. For the speculators, they see the sales and they see a possible upturn in the value of these products. They decide to get in now because they consider there's still ground floor from where we saw the previous price points. This has been an ongoing conversation I've had for the last couple of weeks with just some weird sales going on, but this now is the time where even the Moxman says, I got to find a way to get a few of these cards pinned up and bought before the prices go up. And if I'm thinking about doing it, so are a lot of other people. If I hope to get a few more dark things built and bought before the prices rebound further, we all have our cards we want. We all have our considerations. It doesn't mean the low-end cards. I'm talking about blue chip cards, guys. I'm not talking The Exorcist or The Preacher. I'm not talking about cards that can be reprinted like a ball lightning from the dark. I am talking about mana-based cards from the game that are on the reserve list that you should be looking at in case there's any you care about. Power 9 cards, I wouldn't worry about them. The Bazaars and stuff are not going to adjust that much, but those mid-range cards that have a lot more potential upswing in the future because they do get played a lot, those are cards you're going to want to consider and talk about, think about, and if you don't care, then you just hung around for this video just to chill with me to say this was a lot of fun. Blue chip cards, though, are the ones players play with the most. And that means the potential value rebound on those cards is faster than every other card. If FOMO ever kicks in again, the low-end cards get bought. If you're a player who just loves a certain reserve list card, you're going to buy it anyway. Every paycheck you buy 4 or 5, kind of like I do with Soldevi Excavations. Once a month, I buy 4 copies. That's just the way it is. Other cards, though, are underrated, underappreciated gems that maybe just haven't hit their stride yet, but could rebound back up. I want to know what you guys think in the comment section. I'm sorry the video goes a little bit longer today. There's just a lot to cover when you think about what could happen on the market. It's the what if scenario, not the Marvel version, but the fact we already know these cards have been at this price. I'm not saying they're going back up to that. Don't quote me and say, oh, Moxman said. No. I'm saying they could go back up sooner than people expect, and you should lock down cards that you really want that are going to be harder to get later. Not the $20, $30 card, but the ones that could have been up to $100, $150, the Volrosh Strongholds, those kind of bigger cards that maybe aren't there yet, but could go back up. Those are maybe ones you want to get under your belt and get them out of the way. And for all those people buying the amazing reserve list cards of dual lands, those sales continue to climb. And a lot of it now is off the books, okay? A lot of these sales I'm having a harder time tracking down, and it's being more difficult to get them, but people have been very generous. They send in the sales lists and stuff of how they sold, the Facebook group info. I do appreciate it, so thanks again, everyone. I look forward to seeing your comments in this video. I know reserve list conversations don't appeal to everyone in my audience, but I think this is an important issue to cover because when these prices go back up, it kind of gets Wizards thinking, right? And they kind of think about ways they can get back in there. They're trying to find that back door, you know? Thanks a lot for hanging out, guys. Thanks for being here on the channel. Look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section. And don't forget, guys, I'm going to go have some nachos and cheese, and you should bring a friend to Magic. And of course, a big shout out, a thank you to all the fantastic patrons and YouTube membership member supporters we have here on the channel. Guys, because of all these supporters, daily uploaded content like you saw today is now available for everyone. Thanks again. Okay, guys, you are back here at the end. Now, in case you're wondering, this is the Ramble Jamble. I will say things. They may not all make sense, but I'm going to keep saying them anyway. You can turn your Necronomicons to page 14 today. Subtext of what happens when people don't pay attention. You guys have been noticing, if you've been on my channel for a while, the weird reserve list sales we saw on the weekend. Every Sunday, we've seen buyouts and weird things of hundreds of copies selling of certain cards. That is a direct... It's happening because the prices are cheap. Comparatively speaking to anything Wizards of the Coast puts out right now, they're really cheap. They make sense to buy. That is not always going to be the case. And there will be resistance as the prices go up because price memory says it was cheaper than that and now it's not. And that makes people angry. You can't win. People are angry when they're too cheap and they say it should be even lower. People are going to be angry when it's expensive because now it's too high for them. It doesn't matter. It is what it is. The market's going to do what the market's going to do. The reserve list is no different. Desirability, playability will cause prices to rise. We've seen spikes numerous times over cards like Mind Over Matter and a whole bunch of other cards like Syldevi Digger. That doesn't mean those cards can't go up again. And that's what people have to realize, is that eternal formats that players play, when you play Commander, and you have 20 Commander decks, 10 Commander decks, 5 Commander decks, each one is a unique build that may desire reserve list cards. You may want to get something. I want a Badlands for this black-red. I want this. I want that. It may only be one dual land. But how many dual lands are left? How many are actually available to you to pick up? If you have 20 decks and you put them in 10, every player can't have 10 dual lands. There's not enough in existence. If that kind of buyout action happens again like we've been seeing, the supply is going to be really strained and prices are going to jump up a lot more than people realize. And that's really because the collector people out there never got rid of their collections if they could help it. And the people who can now afford it, they're buying them. I'm sorry, man. They're buying them. We can't stop them. It's an open market. If they see a dual land that's damaged and they want to buy it, they're going to buy it. If they see their first, I'm going to say, I don't know, scrub land, and it's $190 and they buy it, they're not going to put it back on the market unless it goes up a lot. They're going to use it. Well, that puts a strain on supply, demand, man. It's crazy. Anyway, there's a lot going on. I'll cover more on Sunday. I'm waiting for a whole bunch of emails from some friends who do some informational checking for me. So I'll let you guys know what I find out on Sunday's video. But right now, it just looks really odd. I can look at my top 10 Sunday shaping up, and there are some oddball cards that are going to be on this list that just not normally there. So we'll talk about it. Have a great one. Thanks for hanging out at the end. And if you made it to the very, 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 very end, okay, you're at the very, very end. My tire kept, like my new tires, one of them like wouldn't stay inflated. Turned out it was a rim thing. And when they cleaned the tire rim, it got all fixed up. We're good. I was happy. I was having a panic attack that I thought that tire was a dud. I was going to blame, I was like, oh. Anyway, that's one thing. But at the same time, this is the end of the video. And at the very end, Swallow Your Soul is where we're going with it, okay? I'll talk to you guys soon.